It comes from the walls. I was 8 when my brother Josh died. I remember it vividly, even now. Every little detail from when we woke up until his very last breath. He was 2 years older than me, and we would fight non-stop, like most siblings do. That day was no different. We got up early before our parents did, and raced down the stairs. He won, like he always did, and was able to snatch what little was left in the cereal box. I was so mad at him for that. After we had finished breakfast, we ran outside to play. It was a warm summer morning, and I can still imagine that wall of heat hitting me as I opened the front door. We played for hours without pause, and it remains one of the best memories I have of him. He died around noon. A long drop, a crunch, and a snap. It all happened so fast. I just stood there frozen, watching as the pond of blood grew, and listening intently as his final, wheezing breath left his broken body. Shock, my parents said. I was in shock. They couldn't get me to speak for weeks. I observed when the ambulance arrived, the paramedics and the firemen running around shouting hysterically. Then the sirens dying out in the distance. My mom and dad left sobbing inconsolably. I stood silent as the funeral came. I held my breath as they lowered the coffin into the awaiting depths, and only after I saw the headstone loom before me could I allow myself to talk again. We moved shortly after the funeral. My mom could no longer stand living in the house. My dad reluctantly agreed, but kept telling her that they would be losing money on the sale. Mom didn't care. No amount of money could have persuaded her to stay, to live on the property that stole her Josh from her. I knew then that nothing would ever be the same again. The new house was quite a bit smaller than the old one, but I liked it. It was cozy and sweet, and had a sort of old cottage vibe to it. Even though I missed Josh, I was happy to have a bedroom to call my own, to decorate as my own, to grow up in. Days, weeks, and months passed, and not much changed. There was an aura of gloom about the family, a lingering grief that wouldn't quite let go. It was like the days just faded into nothing, like none of us were really there. Originally, I thought that was the reason it came. It was drawn to our grief, to our constant ever-present sorrow. The first time it came from the walls was 3 months after Josh's death. It was a day like all others, gray and uneventful, and I had drifted off to sleep later than usual. My body may be somehow aware that there was something unnatural nearby. I awoke in the darkness by an unidentified sound, somehow coming from all the walls at once. It was a sort of clicking sound, rising in pitch, then lowering again. I had never heard anything quite like it, and I sat up in bed squinting, trying to make out where it could originate from. After a few minutes, my eyes were slowly adjusting to the darkness, and my gaze was drawn to a hole in the wall. It was just a tiny knothole, maybe an inch or two, but for some reason I was convinced it was the source of the sound. I sat there for minutes trembling, just staring into the hole, not knowing why. Then I noticed it started widening, yet inexplicably remaining the same size. I crept under my sheets in fear when the head squeezed through. I just lay there, frozen, unable to move or make a sound. I could hear it moving around out there, like it was exploring or searching. I must have stayed under the sheets for hours before I finally just passed out. The next morning, I jolted awake with a scream and immediately ran to tell my parents about it. They dismissed it, of course. Just some vivid dream caused by an overactive imagination, they were sure. I tried to reason with them, but soon just gave up. They wouldn't listen. This kept happening for weeks. I would wake up to the soft clicking sound, stare at the hole, and hide under my sheets when I saw the head emerge. I could never get a good look at it. I was far too frightened. But it was completely bald and the skin had an ashen gray complexion to it. I could never really judge the dimensions of it. because of the impossible nature of its arrival. I would plead to my parents to just believe me, or let me sleep with them, or simply just explore the knothole or tear down the walls. But they would dismiss me every time, usually just telling me I was being childish, that it was all just a nightmare, and that it would eventually stop. One night, I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. I was going to face the thing that came from the walls, figure out what it wanted. I was terrified but resolute. I woke up like all the other nights, listening intently to that eerie clicking sound, staring at the knothole with absolute concentration, swallowing deeply as the hole started to widen, and choking back my fear when the appalling head squeezed through. It landed on the ground with a thump, and I stared in horror as a tiny, underdeveloped body writhed on the floor, struggling with the weight of an oversized head. I let out a scream then. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. The creature raised its head strenuously, like an alerted animal, and stared directly at me. There was holes, nothing but holes. The mouth was a yawning chasm of nothing. The nose and eyes the same, just endless abyssal rifts. I screamed again, this time probably loud enough to wake up the entire neighborhood. My mom says she still has the nightmares about that scream, and she'll easily admit it froze her blood to ice. My parents came running into the room in a hysterical frenzy, only to find me alone, curled up on the floor in a fetal position, screaming my lungs out. It took them hours to calm me down, and they said I only spoke nonsensical gibberish. They took me to my aunt's for a few days, but eventually I was forced to sleep in my own room again. The ritual continued. I woke up, stared at the tiny hole until the head emerged, then hid under my sheets for the remainder of my conscious night. I was slowly, but surely, getting used to it. I'd still tell my parents about it, but they wouldn't believe me. I know it sounds horrible, but you have to understand. They were still dealing with the death of Josh. They simply had no energy to indulge my self-induced traumas. But at some point, I got too used to it. I simply stopped waking up. The sound no longer bothered me, and I would just sleep through it. Problem solved, right? I certainly thought so. Until I woke up one night with the thing on top of me, staring me right in the face. Those endless abyssal eyes swirling away, that gaping chasm of a mouth hovering inches above. I was too mortified to scream, my body now somehow unable to move at all. As an adult, I could simply have written off to some extreme form of sleep paralysis, if it wasn't for the next part. Foul-smelling, black liquid started pouring from the creature's orifices, completely covering, drowning my face in it. My mouth was filling with the awfulness of it, and at some point I swallowed some, just to catch my breath. The taste was that of death, of decay and rot. I was panicking, desperately trying to move, scream, do anything at all. But I couldn't. I was trapped, and sooner or later I just passed out. I woke up in a pond of the black liquid. I showed my parents the foul stuff, and explained what had happened. My dad said they had seen some signs of leakage around the house, so it must have been that. Just some stale, putrid water seeping through the roof. I resigned then, from ever asking them anything again. They simply couldn't be trusted. We moved a couple years later. I would see the creature every night, but made sure to set an alarm so that I never had to wake up to that horrible creature's face ever again. But now I was free, I thought happily. We were getting along better as a family, and we were finally moving away from that cursed place, and for months I felt wonderful. I had a semblance of life again, of freedom, of joy. But then, one night, I woke up to the soft sound of clicking. I sat up and scanned the walls, and there it was, a tiny knothole, and a head squeezing through it. Moving didn't help at all. The creature followed me, wherever I went. I'd be free for a couple of months, tops. Then I would wake up to that sound, and that head. Every once in a while, I would sleep through it and wake up with that ashen gray face inches from my own. The liquor would pour, and I would swallow. Then I'd wake up in a pond with no one there to believe me. I grew up depressed, stressed, unhinged, half mad. Somehow I made it through school, college, even got a job. But it would never feel good. I could never feel joy. I could never connect with another human being ever again. The creature wouldn't let me. It slowly drained my life from me. When I was 25, my doctor told me my physiological age was that of a 50-year-old. Start exercising, he said. One day, 3 years ago, I went back to the place it all started. I had known for years already, maybe even always, what caused it, what brought it to me, what it was. But I could never take it in, never admit to it, never confess. And that was always the reason for my punishment. I stood by the gaping chasm of the abandoned dried up well where Josh had fallen in, staring into the depths. I remember every moment of that day, every detail vividly. I remember playing hide and seek. I remember hiding behind the garage. I remember seeing Josh looking for me around the well. He stood so close, so dangerously close. Then I remember how mad I was at him for eating the last of the cereal, and I remember creeping up behind him and pushing him with all my might. Then, an endless looping long drop, a loud crunch, a blood-curdling snap. "I am sorry, Josh," I said then. "I didn't mean to do it. I thought it was just water." But his vengeance is endless. Endless like that drop. Endless like the black of the creature's eyes. Endless like my suffering. I will go to sleep tonight, every night, forever. And it will come from the walls. This is Kinetic Symphony. If you've enjoyed this narrated story, please subscribe and like the video to help me grow. Thank you.